Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today again, we have Alex Klassen with us, and we're excited today to talk about, the pain story and how the story we have about our pain can actually start to affect, especially neuroplastic pain or mind-body concerns. And so, yeah, I figured we just kind of get into it. Because I know in pain reprocessing therapy, right, like a big part of it is actually changing our relationship with the pain sensations. I think both logically and kind of on an emotional level too, right?
Yeah. And the two they're so connected, right? I
Yeah.
always think about, narratives as being so important in our life, right? The narrative of who am I? What am I good at? What am I bad at? What does the world mean to me? And I'm sure, like everybody else, I noticed that story can look wildly different based on my mood. So I think, right, there's the story component of it, and then how the emotion might
Yeah.
kind of push certain stories up
Yeah.
or down in our minds.
Yeah, it's totally it, right? Like I've heard like Alan talk about that concept of like story follows state sometimes.
Mm,
Like the state of our body. And I think about this like when we're in pain, it's really easy to get on high alert, right? Because we don't like it. No one likes being in pain. Like there's fear, frustration, or despair. And then naturally that starts to skew almost that story more and more, right?
yeah, yeah. And, we start to think about pain as a feedback loop, right? And, I think it's easy to realize how, yeah, if you're in a high degree of pain, my dog just sat down and is scratching herself beside me. So if there's a mysterious helicopter noise, it's,
That's
it's
what's going
again,
on.
great timing.
Yeah.
So, you start to realize these feedback loops. If I'm in high pain, it's going to encourage my mind, maybe to go into the past and think about the mistake I might have made to get myself injured, or what I wish I had done to be less stressed out, or think about like what my life used to look like when I wasn't in pain and compare that to now and feel even more pain, right? It can
Yeah.
also shoot to the future. What is my life going to look like if this continues? And a lot of fear. So you think if the physical pain moves our mind into those stories scare us. And then we feel even more fear. And the more fear and pain, the worse the story. And then we can get ourselves in this feedback loop, right?
Yeah, it is this feedback loop. And I think, so many people when, we're initially working with them have this just fear-laced story about pain, right? And when I say that, I mean like, there's something seriously wrong with my body that is never going to get better. In fact, it's only going to get worse. And, there are conditions out there that can cause that. But as we know, for a lot of chronic pain, that's not the case, right? And then we have this story around like it's permanent, it's never going away, right? And you can see like the words we tell ourselves, the story we have about the pain, you're right, can actually, after the body's healed, say after an injury, just continue that pain on and worsen it. And I think even for myself, right? Like I had pain, as I've told you, like in my right knee at first. That was it. It was one area. But the story about the pain got so skewed the more and more that the pain went on that it just spread. And you see this a lot with like neuroplastic pain where it spreads over time, right, to other areas. And by the end, like, I think there's just so many areas that were in pain. But I think about one thing that I talk about with clients lots is like the story I had about my back. So do you remember like when we were working at the university together?
Mhm.
And I had that special parking class, right? So like everyone else who worked at the university, including Alex, had to walk like a long distance to get to like the wellness center where we worked
Yeah,
at.
they didn't pay for our parking there.
Yeah, but I
They
got
didn't
this,
go that far.
this is the benefit of the pain, I guess, but I got this parking pass that was literally like a 2-minute walk, right? But the reason that kind of developed was I had this like immense fear, not just fear, but this visualization of what was going on in my back when I walked. Like it felt like so painful when I would walk in my back that I almost imagined like my spine like crunching as I would walk, like
Right.
each step, right?
Yeah.
So if you ever want to escalate, pain, like that's the story that you have is like every step I take is this impact that my body cannot take, right?
Yeah. 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 You start to imagine, discs bulging, things twisting, joints grinding,
Yeah.
things pulling, right? And that visual component, that story component, yeah, it just ups the dial on the fear. And it's not anybody's fault that it happens, right?
No.
It's like, pain, like we've talked about, and I know you've talked about in a lot of your videos, its evolutionary purpose is to make you stop and pay attention, right? It's a call to pay
Totally.
attention and look after yourself. And so it's, very easy to fixate and think, where did this come from? What's wrong with my body? And the story begins. And then the plot thickens in the story, right? We might, you know, have the pain spread somewhere else or receive some kind of advice or read an article online or in a forum. That sounds like what I have. Oh no, it's this now. And it can grow and grow and grow, and the fear grows. And right, it's nobody's fault that it happens. It's just a really unfortunate thing that happens.
Yeah.
And like you said, in our work with clients, something that we look at, let's put the story on the table
Yeah.
and start to check it out and then look at some other evidence and start to come up with another story, right? And I think at first that can be a little bit difficult to say, well, this has been my story of what's wrong with my body, or why there isn't a reason for hope, and to start to say, well, what if there's another story, right? And maybe there is some reasons for hope we can open up, or some other ways of recovering from this, and we slowly build that story, and bit by bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so much in what you said there, right? Like, first off, to pain, the normal human response is fear or frustration or despair, right? Like, it's a bit of a flaw in our design almost, right? Where
Right.
this starts to take place. And so these stories can grow so big. Like for myself, like it was just like the story got scarier and scarier by the day. And I think you're right. Like there's this process where you're trying to create a new story or narrative about the pain. And yeah, looking for evidence, like logically understanding, right? Um, and I think it's these small decisions along the way that we make, right? And I'm always careful with people that I'm not there to make those choices, right? It's the choice of what narrative you slowly want to explore and gather evidence for, and actually kind of focus in on, because that starts to open up options. Like if the pain's neuroplastic, right? If we can start to change that narrative, I've countless people I've worked with where their pain just reduced just because the narrative, like just in our mind, started to change, right?
Mhm,
It
mhm.
creates a sense of safety. Like if we understand that the pain's fully neuroplastic, right? It creates a sense of safety because then we know, like, there's nothing actually wrong, going on in my body. My body's okay. Like when I slowly accepted that about my back, like I can't tell you the amount of relief that I just had of like understanding, there was nothing wrong with my back. Like it was okay. And walking was okay. And in learning that, right, it just creates a sense of safety.
Mhm.
I think there's little decisions along the way that are hard to make. Like I remember, going to so many specialists after specialists, and unfortunately, with some practitioners, right, like there's a sense of fear when they talk about this stuff, right? Like a number of doctors told me, like, this looks like fibromyalgia. This is what's going to happen, right? I think the last doctor that I met with, he was a sports medicine doctor, and he just told me I had hypersensitive nerves, and this was it, right? This is what it was going to be like. And it's hard when you're getting these messages, right, to
Mhm.
just change that narrative from maybe like the really solid medical community, because that's difficult. I think that's a really hard task that we have when we're working with people. Hey.
Totally. Right. And you think about like the formation of that really fearful pain story. Yeah, it's emotionally driven because you're in pain, seeking to, and then you got really credible assessments and credible physicians, people in your life, credible sources, things you're reading that are making that story feel really true.
Yeah.
and it's really scary, right? And I think, then we think about, well, let's look at what the other story can be. I think that's why, in the work that we do, we start with a really thorough assessment for neuroplastic pain, right? To see, like, if we look at the way your pain is behaving, can we start to really credibly say, hey, the way this pain had developed and is persisting,
Yeah.
there's a lot of factors here that suggest this could be neuroplastic pain that can open up the start of a new story.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, then if we start doing some somatic tracking practices and start practicing safety, then people start to actually see their pain behaving differently, moving around.
Yeah.
Then we get more, then we open up the story a little bit more, hope, new story comes a little more. And then we get a feedback loop happening in the other direction, right? That's more safety begets less pain, begets more safety. And that's the way out, right?
That is. Yeah. Which I love you said the way out. That's the name of Alan's book, right?
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but like I think there's so much in kind of what you said there, right? Because even the topic we're talking about is like changing the story of your pain, right? That's a huge thing. That can be fear inducing just in that, right?
Big
Because
time.
if you've been in pain for years and have this whole story, but kind of like you said, it's just these little pieces that we open up, right? At first, the logical evidence, and then doing the tracking and these types of things, but you're looking for exceptions, right? Like you're looking for these exceptions. And when you start to get some of these exceptions when the pain is not behaving like really outside of how structurally caused pain would, then all of a sudden that belief can like really open up, right?
Mm.
But the only way we get there is actually we start to do the work, right? And I think even sometimes the emotional work, like sometimes we do the emotional work and we start to feel just safer emotionally, and all of a sudden the pain's reducing more and more, right?
Mhm.
And it starts to create this new narrative naturally, right? Because I think sometimes people try and like force the narrative upon themselves, right? And it takes some time to build that, right? These exceptions along the way.
Yeah, totally, right? It's not easy to just clunk in, or that idea of just kind of buying in and trusting the process. We're naturally skeptical as human beings, and we should be, right? So, yeah, there's some patience in kind of building that and checking things out and giving ourselves time, right?
Yeah. And I always remember because when you start to have these exceptions, right? Like I had at least one big exception early on because I wouldn't sit on couches because of my back and hips. And, my partner would poke fun at me now, but like I didn't sit on a couch for 2 years, right? Like I was terrified of them because I just thought it's not supporting my back. Like there's something really wrong with this, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we were watching like this romantic comedy, and like I'm willing to admit like I got really into it and I was really enjoying the story, and me and my partner were having a really good time, and then we got in like an hour into it and I realized there was no pain, right?
Right.
I was sitting on the couch, and it's like those exceptions that people can start to gather where it opens it up, where I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like if this was purely structural, every time I would sit on a couch there would be pain. If that's what was triggering it, it's not going to take a vacation, right?
Mm.
And I think, we tie it all back to, I always think about like the Boulder back pain study. We were talking about this earlier, right?
Mhm.
And the changes people got, like people experience changes in their brain. Like that was found on fMRI, like people that had their pain reduced or become basically eliminated, their brain changed. And I heard, Yoni, the lead researcher, talk about the study, and he was talking about how the areas of the brain that changed don't directly represent input from the body, right? So it's not like input from the body; those areas didn't change. What did change were areas in the brain that help us make meaning out of the sensations, right?
Mhm.
And so, and which really is the goal of PRT, is the meaning of the pain changed. The meaning of the sensations in the body changed. Those areas in the brain did change over time in that study, right?
Mm.
And that's what we're kind of working with people on, is almost creating a new narrative, a new story about their pain, but changing the meaning of it, right?
Yeah.
Logically and emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. So well said, right? It's this like inner kind of paradigm shift within ourselves that takes some time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but ultimately can be really liberating.
Yeah. I think it can be liberating and empowering, right? Like when people start to work towards this. And I think we can kind of finish off with just the reminder of like, take it slow, right? Like it's not gonna, that narrative's not gonna change overnight, right?
No, no. And when you're in a lot of pain or in a worse mood, that old pain narrative is going to get loud, and that's okay, right? And that's often why we talk, when we talk about somatic tracking, you're wanting to do that in a low to medium, right? Because in a medium to high, the intensity of that pain, good luck trying to shift into a safer pain narrative, and right,
Yeah,
it's too hard because the emotions are trying to pull you. So be patient with yourself
yeah,
and just keep observing the different stories. um, and that mindfulness is just at the center of all of it.
that's it. And it's just these small steps towards creating that bigger narrative over time, which, as we know, and as that study proved, that we can start to reduce or eliminate neuroplastic pain using that approach, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I appreciate you coming on to the channel again,
yeah,
and we will see you all later.
yeah. Thanks all.
Bye.